The moment the bathroom door creaked open, the last thing Jonathan Hale expected to see was a woman standing in the dim glow of the flickering bulb, her clothes drenched as if she had walked through a storm that did not exist outside. For a heartbeat, the world froze around him, the sound of the dripping faucet suddenly louder than his pulse. His breath caught in his chest as the stranger slowly lifted her eyes to meet his, and what she said next would unravel truths he never thought he'd face again. If you're watching this and you believe in kindness, in second chances, and in the quiet miracles that find us when we least expect them, make sure to like, comment, share, and subscribe. And tell us in the comments where you're watching from. It means more than you know. Jonathan had been a single father for nearly 6 years, raising his little boy, Ethan, in a small, weather-beaten home on the outskirts of town. Life hadn't been gentle with him. His wife, Claire, had passed away unexpectedly, leaving him with a child barely old enough to speak and a grief too heavy for words. Jonathan worked double shifts at a repair shop, returning home each night to cook, clean, help with homework, wash dishes, and tuck Ethan into bed with stories he struggled to read through his exhaustion. And yet, he kept going, because in Ethan's tiny smile, he saw a faint spark of the life he once had. The house often felt too quiet, too empty, too haunted by memories of laughter that no longer echoed through the hallways. Jonathan rarely entertained guests, rarely took time for himself, and never allowed anyone close enough to see the cracks forming in his spirit. He wore his resilience like armor, convincing himself he was managing, even when the weight of loneliness pressed harder with each passing day. But everything changed on that rain-soaked evening. He had just finished bathing Ethan and was returning to clean up the mess of toys and wet towels when he opened the bathroom door and froze. The woman stood by the sink, trembling, water dripping from her hair onto the cracked tiles. Her face was pale, but her eyes carried a story, raw, deep, and broken. Before he could speak, before panic could even rise properly in his chest, the woman whispered words that stilled him completely. "I'm not here to hurt you. I just didn't know where else to go." Her voice was fragile, barely holding itself together. Jonathan instinctively stepped back, his first thought always being Ethan's safety. But next came something else, an ache of recognition. Not of her face, but of her pain. A pain that resembled his own. The woman explained that her name was Amelia Rowan, and she had escaped from someone who had spent years tearing apart her confidence, trapping her in a life that had slowly suffocated her spirit. She wandered for hours, drenched in rain, until she saw Jonathan's porch light flickering weakly in the distance. Something about that small, warm glow gave her enough courage to approach. She thought the house looked safe, lived in, cared for. She didn't intend to intrude. She simply pushed the bathroom window open when she found the door locked and sought shelter before collapsing. Jonathan should have been furious. He should have been terrified. He should have called the police instantly. But standing in the presence of someone so clearly lost, so clearly shattered, he couldn't force himself to turn away. Instead, he listened. Amelia's voice trembled as she described years of hiding bruises beneath long sleeves, of crying herself to sleep, of planning to leave countless times but never finding the strength to do it, until that night. In that moment, Jonathan felt the sharp sting of memories, of Claire's hospital bed, of promises he couldn't keep, of helplessness drowning him. He recognized the look in Amelia's eyes, the look of someone who had reached the limit of what their heart could endure. He brought her a towel, offered her a place to sit, and after putting Ethan to bed again, he prepared her a cup of tea with trembling hands. They sat in silence at first, the house filled with the gentle humming of the refrigerator. But slowly, Amelia began to speak. And Jonathan, who had buried his emotions for far too long, found himself listening with a level of tenderness he didn't know he still possessed. Over the next few days, Amelia stayed in the guest room while Jonathan tried to help her find support services and safe accommodation. Ethan grew fond of her quickly, bringing her drawings and insisting she join them for breakfast. And for reasons Jonathan couldn't yet understand, her presence began to fill the empty spaces of the house, spaces that grief had carved into him long ago. Amelia cooked meals to thank him, cleaned dishes Jonathan had been too tired to notice piling up, and one morning, he found her reading one of Ethan's bedtime stories with a smile that looked painfully new on her face. It had been years since Jonathan had seen genuine warmth from another adult in his home, and with every passing day, Amelia's presence settled deeper into their lives like sunlight slowly returning after a long winter. Still, Jonathan fought his feelings. He told himself he was simply helping someone in need, nothing more. But one evening, when he returned home to find Amelia gently brushing Ethan's hair from his forehead as he colored at the table, something inside him cracked open. She wasn't replacing Claire. She wasn't trying to. She was simply someone who saw the emptiness in his eyes and understood it because she carried her OWN. As Amelia regained strength, she decided she was ready to rebuild her life. She planned on moving to a nearby town where a women's support shelter offered long-term help. Jonathan supported her, even though part of his heart clenched painfully at the thought of her leaving. On her final night in the house, she stood in the doorway of the living room, her hands trembling as she thanked him for saving her, not by fighting her battles, but by believing she deserved better. Jonathan realized then how deeply her presence had changed him. She reminded him that healing didn't mean forgetting the past, it meant allowing new moments to bloom where pain once lived. Ethan cried softly when she left the next morning, and Jonathan held him close, assuring him that kind people always return in some way. Weeks passed, and life slowly returned to its careful rhythm. Jonathan still woke early, still worked hard, still cared for Ethan with all the love he had. But now there was something else inside him, a quiet hope. And then one afternoon, as he picked up Ethan from school, he saw Amelia standing across the street, her posture sturdier, her smile brighter, her spirit no longer dimmed by fear. She waved shyly, and Jonathan felt something in his chest shift, soften, and finally breathe again. Maybe life didn't always give second chances, but sometimes, people did. If this story touched your heart even a little, please like this video, share it with someone who needs it, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more stories like this. Please write in the comments what part of this story connected with your heart the most. Jonathan walked toward Amelia with Ethan tugging his hand. Excitedly, and for the first time in years, he felt the future stretch out before him, not dark, not empty, but full of possibilities. The past hadn't disappeared, but it no longer held him captive. And as the sun dipped behind the trees, casting golden light around them, Jonathan realized something he thought he'd never feel again: that he wasn't walking alone anymore.